Let's bring in political reporter for Axios, Lexi McCammon, and the co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader. Alexi, my gosh, Republicans, all they have to do is read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal or even listen to people like Ann Coulter to hear people cheering for the Republican Party saying, your abortion policy is a disaster. And that was even before this ruling over the weekend. What are Republicans on the Hill expecting?
It's such a mess. I mean, these conservative radio talk show hosts or conservative commentators on TV are clearly upset with this because they've seen how Republicans lost last cycle in particular on this very issue. There's no unifying position that the Republican Party has on abortion. But the interesting thing is that these pro-life leaders of these outside groups like SBA List, they are on the opposite side. They think that it should be a state's issue. They're privately pushing lawmakers and state legislators to continue to make it a federal issue because they think if it comes down to the states, they will continue to lose, given these ballot initiatives that we've seen in places like Kansas and Michigan. And now Democrats are trying to do that around the country again.
Lauren, is it not a real difficult position for those that are pro-life to really even mobilize state by state when you have this wave now of new voters, young voters, as well as women energized because they feel they're under attack?
Yeah, and I think a big part of the Republican leadership just has not gotten the memo that the sands in politics around abortion have completely changed since the Dobbs decision. And, for 50 years, it was a galvanizing issue on the right to, fight against abortion rights. That's all changed now. And interestingly, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Republican, came out this morning and said that she thinks that the Biden administration should ignore the FDA ruling, that it goes too far and that it's a dangerous precedent. And I think part of what we're seeing is that the extremity of where these sort of undemocratic nature of how these bans are going. You look at what Ron DeSantis is trying to do in Florida after having said that he supported abortion rights after a certain term in viability. Now they're looking at a total ban on abortion, including a requirement that women prove that they have been victims of sexual assault in order to access the exceptions. And then, of course, this abortion pill ruling, which is the most, we talked about it yesterday on your show, the most ideologically written ruling. There's no legal basis for it. It's just pure ideology. Americans are looking at this and saying, absolutely not. And people are dying because of the lack of access. It's just outrageous.
Absolutely.
The argument against expanding the court has always been that it will delegitimize the court's credibility. Post-Dobbs, the court's credibility has plummeted. And it's plummeted, I hate to say this, I'm just going to say it. It's plummeted in part because you have one organization raising billions and billions of dollars that have just been outright saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make the court as ideological on conservative issues as possible. And then after Dobbs, they throw a banquet. And you have Supreme Court justices who ruled against 65, 70% of where Americans were on the issue of choice. And they go there and they have this huge celebration and they're laughing and joking about it. Richard, like everything else conservatives are doing, so-called conservative, nothing conservative about these people. They're radical extremists. But what Republicans are doing is they're setting up the left's best argument for expanding the court. And stay with me, because usually what you'd say is, oh, but that will take away the credibility of the court. No, they're doing that right now. So once again, they're opening a door and they're going to allow the left to walk through it like they did in Wisconsin, like they did in Michigan, like they did in 2022, like Trump does in Georgia. And in the end, when it happens, they're only going to have themselves to blame.
They're going to do that, and people on the left are going to have that reaction. I also think we're going to see more and more people begin to say, let's ignore the courts. almost a version of a 21st century version of nullification. They're not legitimate, therefore we're not going to respect their decisions. And again, I know Lauren wants to jump in here. Where does that leave us? It just worries me that American democracy is ultimately going to be the big loser here beyond the specifics of the issue.
Well, we got to look at the state houses. And obviously what happened in Tennessee last week is a wake-up call, I think, for a lot of Americans. But there is a really serious representation problem across a lot of state houses. You look at Ohio, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and more, where you have a Republican supermajority in a state that actually is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. In the case of North Carolina, they now have a one-seat supermajority because someone switched parties, a Democratic governor, a state where Trump only won by 1.3%, and they are about to pass a total abortion ban in a state where 60% of their own voters don't want it. So you start looking at the landscape. The courts are one piece of it, but where we really, I think there's a big opportunity is in these state houses. Americans have mostly not paid attention to who represents them in state legislatures. We got to start paying attention now, because this is where, you know, as the courts send more and more issues back to the states, which is core Republican ideology, states' rights, states' decisions, Americans need to pay attention. We need to start funding candidates that are running. We talked about it before on the show. 45 seats in Florida state legislature in 22 ran unopposed. 0 Democratic candidates ran against those Republicans. That's not going to work. Like, folks have to do this.
Co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader, and political reporter for Axios, Alexi McCammond. Thank you both very much for being on this morning. We're going to turn now to the global oil